What's going on, everybody? Aidan from Birdsworth Boys here, coming to you with our first episode of the Eagles 2025 offseason. Thank you to everybody who followed along this season. An incredible ride, incredible journey for the podcast itself. And also thank you to the Philadelphia Eagles for a perfect dream season. Everything from the NFC Championship to the Super Bowl to the parade, everything went so perfectly. Thank you a million times over. We are coming down from the high of the parade and how exciting it was. It was a perfect day. If you reside in the Philadelphia area like I do, you know every other day recently has been heavy wind, heavy rain, some snow mixed in. But on Friday for the parade, it opened up perfectly for sunshine and nothing but rain and beers was the only precipitation that you saw Friday at the parade. It was incredible. But what we want to do is do that again. And it starts this offseason with the Eagles and some of the decisions that they have to make so we can get back to the mountaintop and back to the art museum steps to relive that celebration yet another time, because I cannot get enough of it. So what we're going to do tonight is power rank the core four free agents for the Eagles and how likely you would be to resign them and how badly you want the Eagles to resign them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to power rank the likelihood and how badly you want the Eagles to re-sign these guys. And the core four itself would be in no particular order. On defense, you've got Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Zach Bond. And then on offense, you've got Mekhi Becton. So I'll go through my order. It seems like everybody has a different 1 through 4. Now, I'm factoring in both how badly I want this player back, but also the likelihood that they could leave. So it's kind of a mixture between what I would do if I was the GM versus what is the most realistic thing to happen. And let me just say this before we start power ranking those guys. The Eagles do have tough decisions to make this offseason, but yet every team has tough decisions to make. Every team has free agents. And my God, for the Eagles to be in the situation that they are in, coming off a huge Super Bowl victory in which they were clearly and adamantly the best team in the league from September on, to only have just a small pretty much abnormal amount of free agency decisions to make and overall roster decisions to make is pretty remarkable. You look at a team maybe like the even the Chiefs are a good example, right? They face some really tough decisions this offseason. Meanwhile, the Eagles have 10 of their 11 offensive starters already locked up under contract for next season. So they are already ahead of the game and rebuilding themselves for another Super Bowl run next year, and they are way ahead of the 2018 Eagles coming off the 2019 season because of the health issues that team faced, some free agency decisions that team faced, the overall age of the team. So they are in good shape already. But let's get into it and talk about the decisions that they will have to make. Again, we're power ranking them, likelihood to come back, likelihood for me to want them back. Now, at number one, and I think this is probably everybody's number one, but it's Zach Bond. It's obvious, right? Like an all-pro linebacker. He was an incredible sensation this year. You hear the term nose for the ball a lot in football. I think Zach Bond exemplified that nonstop throughout the year, captivated, honestly, at the end there by the late in the first half interception of Patrick Mahomes. He was always around the ball, whether it be forcing the ball out himself, recovering the ball, or those interceptions I had, like I mentioned earlier, with Patrick Mahomes. So you definitely want him back on this on this defense. What you also saw from Bond that was interesting, and all of those clips that they release in the NFL mic'd up, he seems like a leader within the locker room. It seems like he always knows where he needs to be on a football field, and when he's there, he is able to make a play. So he is above and beyond just a sheer incredible talent, and what a diamond in the rough for the Eagles to find him. So they'll want him back. But I think he will be biggest lightning rod of all the free agency options that they have to choose from, because I think that they want him back. I think that they very will try to re-sign him. On the flip side, I think that there at some point is going to have to be a walkaway number for the Eagles, even if they don't want there to be a walkaway number. I think they're going to need there to be a walkaway number. I think Zach Bond screams to me bad team overpay. You look at his story, like I said, an overnight sensation from special teamer to all-pro linebacker. He captivates that season with an interception in the Super Bowl. So he's a Super Bowl champion. All of these things culminate in a front office wanting to fix their defensive problems by throwing money at the issue and seeing if that'll create a solution. Zach Bond seems like that type of guy that they would want to do that. And you look at it, that is a situation where if they do overpay with his story and with his accolades this last year, you would still have 100% approval rating amongst your fan base if you do throw money at this situation and do overpay him. So I think that puts the Eagles in quite the predicament where they want him back and they don't want there to be a walkaway number, but there may need to be a walkaway number. You know the likely culprits. It's the same every offseason. They try to throw money at the problems to fix it and see if it'll create solutions. We're talking about our Cardinals, our Bears, like they did with TJ Edwards, maybe the Panthers, who tried to sign away Miles Sanders, or even the Jaguars are a likely name that seem to always be throwing money around in free agency. And look how that turns out. You could see a team, and I think this is a great example. The Commanders have a lot of cap space. They have defensive issues. Couldn't you see a team like the Commanders throwing a lot of money at Zach Bond and saying, all right, that's it. We can tackle now. We signed Zach Bond. That puts the Eagles in a very tough situation because they're going to want to match any number that they get. It's just a matter of fact that sometimes you can't. You can't be paying 14, 15 million a year for a linebacker, or you can't be putting 4 to 5 years to somebody like a linebacker like that. There's too many other mouths to feed, and that could create an issue for them. Now, and I'll say this. There may also be a walkaway number because they are high on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. If you remember, after Nakobe Dean got hurt in the Green Bay game in the wild card game, Vic Fangio came out in the press conference and said, we believe that Jeremiah Trotter's time soon, and we think that might be he said basically along the lines of, we think his time is coming and his time could be now, I think is what the exact quote is. Now, Oren Burks did end up playing very well, so we never really got to see Jeremiah Trotter on the field too much. But at the same time, it is clear that they're pretty high on him. They may end up in a situation where they're like, listen, we'll take the risk. We'll try to ball out with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Now, here's another factor with this. Like I just mentioned, with Nakobe Dean injured in the playoffs, it's unlikely he's ready for the start of the season. And it's not like he had a broken pinky or something. This is a situation with a ruptured patella that maybe he does lose a step, which creates yet another risk. Oren Burks, who stepped up for him, he is a free agent as well. So I think what the Eagles will likely try to do is put together a short year deal for Zach Bond. So it's a higher salary in the meantime, but it's lower years. And why do you do that? Well, you got some guys on that defense. Sure enough, they're going to be in contract extensions at the end of their rookie deals. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. You have to save money in the long run for some of these guys. So if you offer 2 years to Zach Bond, his contract will be coming off the books when those guys are ready to sign their extensions so that they can stay with the Philadelphia Eagles as well. So Bond is the one that I'm going to talk about the most extensively tonight, like I just did. But at the same time, I think he has the most variation. I think he's going to be a lightning bolt for a lot of teams this year, including the Eagles in this offseason. I think he's one of the biggest names to look at going into NFL free agency. So that's why I want to start. I think he's number one. I think it's the most likelihood that they'll re-sign him. But man, oh man, is there going to be some stiff competition to get him back in Midnight Kelly Green next year. On to number 2, and this might be my most controversial one that I have on the list, but I have Mekhi Becton. Now, I think a lot of people want the 2 other defensive guys. I have Mekhi Becton here. I think it's just a process of how my brain works, to be honest with you. Like I mentioned at the start, the Eagles have 10 of their 11 starters back under contract for next season. I just figured to myself, hey, let's make it 11. Let's just go down. If you're looking at it in like how we normally see our jobs, where then you're sitting there and you're looking at an Excel spreadsheet, if you could just go green line, green line, green line, green line, all the way down, all 11, and run that back and say, I'll take my risks on the defensive side of the ball. That's how my brain works. It's like, all right, we'll fix the defensive issues, but at least we have all of our offensive lined up. We have it locked in. Now, here's the thing with Becton. He's still obviously pretty young. He didn't last very long with the Jets. And before he came to the Eagles, he and both Bond, I wouldn't call them hometown discounts, but they're the most likely to re-sign for maybe a little less money than you'd expect because of how they've been able to revitalize their career here in Philadelphia. And I could think you could see that with Becton as well, with how well he played. There was also a story during the year, and it came from a credible source, and I don't know if this is truly the plan, but they did mention that Mekhi Becton keeping him to a long-term extension, getting that deal done with him, because eventually Lane Johnson will retire and they'll swing Becton out to tackle. Now, to me, again, this was from a credible source and a credible article, but at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, well, it didn't work out with tackle. That's why he's in Philadelphia in the first place. Do we want him to just stay at guard because we know it works at guard? We know what he's capable of at the guard position. Do we really want him to swing out the tackle and take that risk again? Well, it's kind of how we got into trouble the first time, right? So he's number 2 on my list. I think there is the likelihood that, hey, maybe he takes a little bit less money to stay here with the Eagles. I'm interested to see what his market is. There's always a big market for, big guys, right? I think a lot of people now are going to say to themselves, hey, we want to replicate the process of the Eagles. We've talked about this. I think we're going on our 5th draft show. I've said it every draft show that we've done. You replicate it by building through the trenches. So I can see somebody trying to throw some money at him. I don't think he'll have the same market that Bond will, where he'll have a lot of suitors, but there'll definitely be some suitors for Mekhi Becton, the Eagles being one of them. So on to number 3, I have Milton Williams. Now, he is at a position that the Eagles care about the most. In the interior, defensive tackle. They build through the trenches. They build through their infrastructure. So that alone, you can see them saying, hey, we want to solidify that guy in the middle. That is a point of emphasis for our team. Build through the trenches. Build through the infrastructure. That being said, I saw everything I needed to see when they did their exit interviews after the Super Bowl, when he showed up in a Clutch Sports Agency hoodie. That's all I needed to know about the likelihood that Milton Williams will be back next year. He is going to get the bag wherever he goes. I don't know if it's possible for it to be Philadelphia. Again, just like Bond, I think there is a bad team that will overpay and overpay mightily. And the sweatshirt told me everything I need to know, that they will take the bad team overpay in a heartbeat with Clutch Sports. So I love Milton Williams, but is this a situation for the Eagles that's kind of like leaving the table at the casino when you're up, right? And what I mean by that is they did everything right. Maybe it's just time to walk away. They found Milton Williams in the 3rd round. And if you guys remember, this was the infamous Tom Donahoe, Howie Roseman picture where he went for the fist bump and didn't quite get it because they wanted another player, and Howie ended up with Milton Williams. So that alone, pretty funny story. Can't believe that turned out to be Milton Williams. But did they just win that, and it's time to walk away? They won the hands at the blackjack table. They've won it mightily. You can cash out now. And I think that's what the Eagles might do. They got somebody in the middle rounds. He performed above his value and he got great return on investment. Let somebody else give him that second contract where you're going to have to pay a lot, and you repeat that process and what's a deep defensive tackle draft. And maybe you just throw your draft picks instead of your money at the defensive line yet again. That's how you build, and it's been working. You drafted Jalen Carter, Milton Williams, Jordan Davis. You drafted Owen Moro Ojomo. We'll throw him in there too. You keep throwing draft picks at the defensive line and defensive tackle and defensive interior specifically, and it's working. Do you go back to that instead of handing out a hefty second contract for a guy? It allows you to stay young. It allows you to keep cap flexibility. So to me, I think it's a situation where they did everything right, and maybe they're just at the end of the road. It's no knock on Milton Williams, who I think is an incredibly talented player. If they bring him back, I will have absolutely no qualms about it without, because again, this is a point of emphasis for this team. They care about the line. They care about the infrastructure. If they double, triple down on it with a contract, that's not going to be the end of the world to me. But I would like them to see them just invest more resources in the draft here for him. And I'll get to my next guy here because we're going to stay on the defensive line. But last and certainly not least is Josh Sweat. I do think there was a credible case for him to be MVP of the Super Bowl. He was so good, and so is Milton Williams. You could tell those guys are playing for the next contract in that game. My God, it was a perfect storm, and we talked about that pregame. That could be a situation that you saw. 2 guys who knew if they got to Mahomes early and often, they would increase their value come the offseason. And certainly they did that, and they may have priced the Eagles out of them with their performance, which is a shame, but it was great. Now, Josh Sweat, the reason I put him last is, one, I just think defensively they probably have a higher priority on Zach Bond. They, in terms of talent, And I think they have a higher priority on the position with Milton Williams. So he kind of ends up coming in third on the defense. I know he's fourth overall on my list here for Josh Sweat. And if you remember at the end of last season, we thought we were going to lose Josh Sweat then. They ended up doing a restructure and they ended up trading Hassan Reddick instead. But there was a point in time last offseason where you thought Josh Sweat was going to be out the door. I think he's another guy who you knocked it out of the park, because when Josh Sweat was drafted, he was yet another middle round guy. And the knock on him, and I don't even know if you can consider it a knock, because he was incredibly talented, but a knee injury in college led teams to believe that he couldn't be a 3-down lineman and 3-down defensive end there in the NFL. Well, I think he was above and beyond that for the Eagles. He had a great year this year. I think all in all, he's been a great Eagle. He's been like an unsung hero, very, never the main guy on the line, but always getting his job done. Steady, great performer, performed when it mattered most in the Super Bowl. So I think he'll get the bag. I just think that it'll be somewhere else, because I think if the Eagles are looking at it, they think Nolan Smith and Jalen Hunt, they're your starters, right? Like, this is it. You saw what they were capable of. You saw Nolan Smith grow and perform at the end of last year. And it seemed like every week Nolan Smith was ascending into the heir apparent of Brandon Graham. With each week that Brandon Graham was hurt, Nolan Smith got better and better and better, which is exactly what you want to see from a young guy. And it is now at the point you're expecting him to be a starter. And based on this playoffs, you're probably expecting Jalen Hunt to be a starter as well. So do they want to commit that amount of money to Josh Sweat? I don't know. Now, here's where it gets interesting with Sweat. The Eagles are in a position where they could lose 3 defensive end if Sweat goes, because you might expect Brandon Graham to retire. They're going to try to get off this Bryce Huff contract. They weren't playing him as it is, so I don't even know if you can count him towards the line. They wouldn't play him last year. I don't expect them to play him next year either. And then if Sweat goes, you're now down 3 defensive ends. I don't think that's something you could simply draft your way out of. Like, just sheer numbers alone, you can't just take 3 defensive ends and try to figure it out. You're going to have to put money into that position somehow. I'd love for it to be Myles Garrett. I don't think that is a very realistic option for a variety of reasons. One, it is a high price tag. The Eagles have a way of shape-shifting these. I think they could take a lot of the money up front so that it's not hitting when you're having to re-sign Jalen Carter like we talked about earlier. But more so, they have the least desirable first-round pick, because if you didn't know, we won the freaking Super Bowl. So are the Browns going to take the 32nd overall pick for their franchise player? You'd expect they could probably get a better deal elsewhere. So as much as I'd like Garrett, and that would just automatically solve your defensive end issue in terms of depth, I don't think that is a realistic option. So does that open the door for a Sweat return? Because they're just saying to ourselves, strength in numbers at this position, we got to have a guy. We might lose 3 guys if we lose Sweat in free agency, Huff to being cut, and Graham to retirement. Pick your poison. You lose all 3. All of a sudden, a position that had a lot of depth by the end of the year with the return of Graham, the emergence of Hunt and Nolan Smith, and the stellar performance from Sweat. Now you're thinking to yourself, wow, we don't have a lot there, and it's a very, very key position for a lot of teams. Another name that we've thrown around on the stream is I think if you're going star hunting, Max Crosby is a more viable option than Myles Garrett because of the situation that the Raiders are in. And I just think that'd be more realistic, but I don't think either of them are very realistic. I'd put like Crosby at 5% and Garrett at 3%. So in that case, if we're power ranking those, I'd put Josh Sweat at 15% and definitely above both of those guys. So I'm not ruling out a return for Josh Sweat. I just think that he comes in last in terms of our power rankings here. So that's it. The first episode in the offseason. Wow. What a just relaxing feeling. We're not at free agency yet. We're talking about these guys, but we're talking still about the stellar playoff performances that they all had. Man, I cannot get over the perfect ending to that season. There was an incredible team, and I hope they are able to run it back. That starts with building well in free agency. We know what free agency was able to do for this team yet a year ago with guys like Zach Bond, and you may have heard of him, Saquon Barkley, and hey, even Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as well. So hey, to finish and conclude, all 4 of these guys I think have a realistic chance of being back It seems unrealistic that you can keep all four. I think at most you go 50% and get 2 of these 4 guys back. Even though Howie Roseman is a cap wizard, at some point you just have to say to yourself, you can't afford all these guys, and there's some extensions coming down the line that you're going to need to pay as well here soon, including Cam Jurgens, who we didn't mention today, but he's one on offense you're going to want to get an extension done for, and then Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith down the line. So the Eagles are in great shape. They're a great team. The crux of that offense in that core, 10 out of 11, coming back next season. A lot of the defensive guys are still young. They are in a great spot. But you got to fine-tune the engine sometimes, and they'll look to do that this offseason. So we'll have all the information for you as the rumors kind of pour in terms of who they're looking at, who do we think will be back, and we'll get into our draft coverage as well. So I appreciate, again, everybody who followed us along for this incredible journey this season, and it does not stop here. In some ways, and especially with our numbers sometimes, we are just ramping up with our offseason coverage. So we'll talk to you guys soon, and we'll talk to you more about NFL free agency.